Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Max Hall, and I work at the World Economic Forum. Welcome to the 27th World Economic Forum on Africa, and welcome also to this issue briefing on saving lives in South Sudan. I'm very pleased to be joined by Whitaker, UNESCO Special Envoy for Peace and founder of the Whitaker Peace and Development Initiative. For the next 20 minutes or so, we will hear from our guest on his work in the region, and if time allows, we will take a question or two from the floor. Forrest, thank you.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you became involved in the region and what you're doing now?
Actually, I became involved in East Africa, I think in Uganda, about over a decade ago. And I was working there at that time with child soldiers, working with them in school, and working on different types of psychosocial things that we were working on. And then after that, a lot of youths were coming out of South Sudan, child soldiers as well, into Uganda. And I started to recognize this sort of pathway, and it's something that needed to be dealt with. When they became the youngest country in the world, I was hoping that perhaps we might be able to be there in support of what was going on, and hopefully that the country wouldn't teeter back into the kind of chronic conflicts that it had had in the past.
And this hasn't happened. You were in South Sudan a few days ago. Can you tell us about what you saw and what you did there?
Well, I saw a number of things. I mean, we were there to check on the programs that we have. We were launching a new program in Budwe in the Western Equatoria in Yambio. But initially, when I first went in, I went and addressed the students at Juba University to speak with them, just to encourage them on their path of learning and what they could do for the country to recognize their own power. And then we went into to Yambio, where we started to initiate the program, which is the Youth Peacemaker Network program. We were training the youth in conflict resolution, ICT or computer technologies, life skills, and in business and entrepreneurial skills. They'll be going through this program for a while. We had already established the program in two states in Eastern Equatoria. So now we're working on Yambio, or working on Western Equatoria states, the 4 now that we're in.
And what's your impression of young people there? What are the things that they're telling you?
I have to say that South Sudanese are very resilient, very strong, really powerful spirit, you know, because they're dealing with some difficult things. Right now, it's a really difficult time in the country. They're aware that the people are leaving the country. Obviously, there's 1.8 million people displaced, 1.7 million people as refugees. They're aware because also it's their family members and others. Even my youths have sent some of their family, particularly their wives and children, to neighboring refugee camps. They're aware of that. There's frustration because of food insecurity. I think the food insecurity in the country is now almost 50% of the country. 5 million people are food insecure in the country. And so they're aware of it on a personal level because it's affecting, one, the inflation that's happened with the money for them, being able to even purchase foodstuffs for themselves. Because of the conflict, they've had to move out of regions and areas, leaving behind their agricultural crops, leaving behind their businesses and their work to be able to find safety. So the youths have expressed that a number of times to me, talking to me about insecurity along the roads. There's a lot of insecurity in regards to banditry, in regards to dealing with both sides of the confrontation that are going on. They have to deal with both. And of course, the issues of gender with the women in traveling and things of that nature, and how rape as an instrument of war has happened a lot in the country. So all of those things they're aware of. I think there's the issues of water, food aid, issues of sanitation, issues of health, all of those sort of basic needs are being dealt with, they're struggling with a lot of those things. But again, I mean, I could say through the people I'm working with the youth I'm working with, there's a resiliency and a power and a belief that they can move themselves forward even during this difficult time.
Yeah, when we spoke briefly earlier, you actually said you were correct me if I'm wrong. You said you were optimistic about the youth there, despite the experiences that they've been through.
I would have to be optimistic because you know when you're training youths in war zones or in areas of deep conflict, whether it's intra-tribal conflict or whether it's military conflict or however, and the youths so far have really taken on the mantle of being peace builders and community builders. I mean, they have went into schools where armies have taken over and convinced them to leave, to get the soldiers to leave so the children can go back. They have negotiated crises between tribes where cattle and different things have been stolen, and there would be a war because of certain things that have been stolen. They've negotiated those things. One of them became a member of parliament. One of them became the president of the youth union. Mm-hmm. The governor requested them to be the mediators for the state. They've taken it upon themselves to go out into the different communities to try to communicate the peace agreement in different tribal languages. So I recognizing the difficulty and the hardships that they may be going through, I can't help but remain hopeful if these type of accomplishments can go on during this really unbelievably difficult time in the country, and where I have to be honest, I'm really surprised that more of them haven't left. So far, my entire team that was the youths that have been trained there have stayed and are continuing to work. They've sent their wives and their children, to refugee camps. We just started a program in a refugee camp in Kiryondongo in Uganda, and some of my youths have sent their family there. We started the program recently. We launched it just about a week ago. That is the kind of resiliency that I think you want to believe in, and you have to try to believe in. Now, the question is, when you look at it on a more global level, who's going to step up and actually bring the players to the table to have a real discussion to try to solve this problem of conflict in the country? Because underneath that layer, there's a group of people who hope for it. I felt it there. I felt it the other day when I was in the refugee camp. I had discussions. The youths were explaining to me how they were feeling about things, talking about their grievances, different things of that nature. So that's why I have that hopeful idea, because I've seen it.
You talk about people or organizations stepping up. I mean, there have been repeated alarms sounded by the UN on the risk of genocide or famine in South Sudan, and things don't seem to improve on the ground. What's your feeling of the international community? Do you think it's played its role to prevent the escalation of violence in South Sudan?
I think the international community has to continue to push forward the agenda of building peace in the country. I think that they can't step down just because the situation is complicated and difficult. We have the UN, which is there to help bring peace. We'll have to step up to try to get an inclusive dialogue so that we can find some means to be able to end this conflict. So, do I feel they've done enough? No, because we haven't gotten to that place. They will have done enough when we've had those dialogues and we've been able to change this equation so that 50,000 people won't be dying. That's how many have died so far. And I understand it's a difficult place and a terrain to work in. Even as an aid worker, I think Gutierrez said it's the number one place for danger for humanitarian workers. There's been like 80 of them killed, So you understand, some of the issues on a practical level when you're on the ground and you're trying to figure out, well, how do we go down this road? How do we bring these supplies here when there's an armed force stopping you from bringing it to a particular region, say it be Unity State, and so they are not getting the resources to eat, to survive, but there is a danger there. So we're trying to, I think they have to find that balance, but it has to be addressed. It has to be dealt with. Or as Adama Ding said, when he said that the indicators are there for a possible genocide occurring, but what he said was, which was interesting, was that that's a process that can be averted if we can continue to step inside of it. The same with the famine. With 5 million people, half the country that being food insecure. What you do, and those things are processes. Even famine is a process. Of course, this is a man-made famine.
Yes.
It's different than a drought or it's made by conflict. But the process, and it's a process, like I say, that the international community, the UN, all the players and everybody who can and all the people who can hear and want to shout about it should be doing, because that's what's going on.
You talk about these processes and dialogue. How do you see youth being involved in it on the ground? Yeah, what's their role here?
Well, I definitely believe in the youth on the ground being, advocates and for peace and for working in the system. Look, the South Sudan, 72% of the people are under 30 years old. So that's the country. So when you talk about dealing with the country, you have to deal with the youth. And I think that what I have observed is with, at least in the situations, in difficult situations, that if the skill sets are there, if there's an ability to excel or to be able to find a livelihood and an ability to help their environment and their community, that it happens. It actually happens. I saw the first example we hadn't gotten fully trained. We chose Jonglei State as our entry point into the South Sudan because we thought that would be the place where a conflict would occur. Well, that we were correct. All our youths were scattered. But they took the things that we had given them, the instruments, the tools, the phones, and this, and started calling each other and helping each other across tribal lines to get free. So that was the first thing. This is the capacity that they had, and they had the resilience that a lot of people don't have to be able to continue to do that during difficult times, And the same thing is happening, like I say, with the youths that I'm working with. And when I was with these new youths that we started training just the other day in Yambio, I was like, this is a strong group. They're going to have a lot to say. I've been all over South Sudan. I've been to Bor, Way, Yay, all the different areas, and I've still met that quality under difficult circumstances. So the community itself that can aid in making some kind of solution happen has to step up.
You talked a little bit about some of the instruments and tools that you try to give youth, and actually when we had a brief conversation earlier, you talked about some of the sort of skills like active listening. Could you just elaborate on that?
Well, we're working with them on conflict resolution, so communication is a key point in any sort of resolution of conflict, and to have active listening is one important concept that they learn pretty much right away. It's an early concept for them. They've learned, sources of power, reasons for conflict. They've learned how to create frameworks to be able to set out mobilizations inside of their community. So, but that was one, and listening, making sure you comprehend, to be able to repeat the dialogue that you've actually heard it. As you said, if I heard you right, you were saying that I spoke earlier about active listening.
When we had a conversation before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's active listening.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So that and issues like no judgment, not judging, different types of things. This is in the early stages that you always continue, because there's a fundamental foundation to be able to do any mediation, because they're mediating actively in the community, and that's one of the pillars that they learn.
And is it about, so it's about teaching them to be mediators as well, because you talked earlier about how they went out and actually they took what they'd learned and you didn't use the word replicated, but yeah, that was.
Well, it's true. I mean, systematically. I mean, the elders are not left out of this equation either. The actual structures, because the youths need them. So there are committees that are created. In Eastern Equatoria, there's like 10 advisory groups that are older. And these youths are taught. They were taken 2 from each single county of their state. They go back and train 2 from every village in every county of their state. So actually in Eastern Equatoria, in every single Payam village in that state, there are 2 people trained in this methodology. And when they go in there, they work with them to create financial projects, or income generating projects for the community. What will help bring the community together, under these difficult times. They have launched all their programs. They're still all moving forward, and hopefully that will stay on track, given the current situation. But they have done that, and the community is there, and everyone is in support of it. And I think that's probably why, possibly, one of the things that we do is there's a community center that's built in each one of those counties that the foundation builds. It teaches ICT, literacy, number of skills, business skills, and it acts as a hub for the community. And so I think the community is in support of them, and there aren't any stakeholders in the community that aren't, in a way, a part of their success or the success. So that's been going on, but as I say, while the country is going through some horrific times at times.
What challenges has your organisation faced, and I guess organisations like yours?
Well, we've faced the challenges of the conflict. I've had to, at times, fly my staff out into other countries. They become refugees in other countries, in Kenya and Uganda, because the situation was so life-threatening that we flew them out. So these are challenges that you face. Road securities, technology issues. Because we're in some ways technology-based. We had companies that were supplying, connectivity to our youths. It's difficult. So for once, you have to put in electricity, because electricity isn't a commonality necessarily. And then you have that. Then you try to get connectivity with internet, and it's hard to do. Most of those companies have moved out. Some of them have moved out. Some were in the region. Some pulled back. Zane was more spread out. They kind of stepped back a little, but they're still there. Working. I think MTN, but it's difficult. So recently we were having so much trouble that we were able to get a Kenyan company to supply that for us. It's quite expensive, but we needed it for the youth and also for the training. So we have technology issues, issues of conflict, issues of road insecurity, of not, whether you can pass through certain roads. Like to get a youth to say Yambio from another place, you may have to drive a circular fashion in the safer spaces to be able to get them down the right road, to be able to come and meet here. We have to decide if this last leg of this journey is in Juba, maybe we need to just create the whole leg and they all go to Juba for work and training. We have to make decisions because of the difficulties of different circumstances, but but I'm proud of my staff. I think they're an amazing staff, very dedicated staff. I'm lucky. I'm unbelievably proud of the youths, because I'm each day amazed by them, and each day realize, that I need to have more courage.
And what are some of the successes that have really stood out for you?
What I was saying, just even having, like say, Magdalena, who's went through our program, she was called by the ministers and the commissioners to come and train them in conflict resolution. So I looked at a picture, this girl in the middle of 40 elder men, and it's very powerful. Culturally, it's a very powerful thing, that they would bring her in to train them all. And then her and Ingita as well, went and were training people inside of the community and stopping conflicts. I'm really proud of the fact, unbelievably proud of my youth Michael, who went and convinced the soldiers to leave the school. So there's a lot of things that are and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue that, and I'm hopeful that thank the blessings that no one has been harmed.
Before we go to questions, we're here. We're at the World Economic Forum. There's over 1,000 participants here from representing all different sectors of society, some very influential people. What's your main message to them? You want to sort of inspire some sort of action. What's your most prominent message here?
Well, corporate moves forward a great portion of the world, so certainly if they were advocates in pushing forward to make these things happen, to everyone come to the table, it would be helpful. Certainly they can look to trying to find looking at the risk investment, but the risk investment that I think will pay off in dividends because of a large grouping of people who need certain things. So I think to take that now as an investment in the future of the nation and of the world. It's a difficult thing to do, but I have to say that my organization is mostly funded by partnerships, and a lot of those partnerships are with people like corporations, like Ericsson, and Zane was one of the partners, and MasterCard, and IKEA, and a lot of organizations that come together around the cause of trying to fix a problem. And they allow us the freedom to not try to be involved in what we do, but they are very present to knowing what we do and believe in that. And I think they've allowed there to be some movement and some work. And of course, the kind of humanitarian aid also that's needed in the South Sudan is so large that it's going to need help. It's not, the pledges and stuff haven't fulfilled the need. I was in a pledge session with then Valley Amos of the UNOCHA in Nairobi just to try to raise funds, and we raised quite a number of funds. It was I think about $500 million at the time, and but the country needs so much in order to move itself out of the problem that it's in. I'm sorry if I'm going on.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Apologize.
I think we have time for a few questions. Could we have? There's a gentleman there, and a gentleman here. If we can have on this side. Could you state your name and the organisation you work for?
Sure. My name is David Wright, and I work for Save the Children. I'd like to thank Mr. Whitaker for all the advocacy you've been doing on South Sudan and keeping it alive in the popular consciousness. It's very important work. I think for me, one of the stark statistics of South Sudan is the fact that a South Sudanese girl is more likely to die in childbirth than complete her primary school education. And I was wondering, with the work you do with youth, are you targeting teenage girls, giving them options to stay out of early marriage? Because, of course, if a girl has a baby before she's 18, she's a lot more likely to die in childbirth than if she has her first baby when she's 25 or 26. So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more information of the kind of work you would do with teenage girls and giving them other options around that.
Sure.
And then I think we had a question over there.
Hi, it's Angelo Coppola from China Central Television. Mr. Whitaker, the absence of one of the leaders, the rebel leader, Dr. Machar, is he adding to the instability in country at the moment, in your view? And should he be allowed to go free and go in there? How are we going to resolve the issue if one of the key players is kept out of the country?
So something on the key players. Should we go first? So we had a question there on
Yeah,
yes.
I just want to say that Save the Children does amazing work, and thank you for it. Great, great, great work. There's a few structures that we have, and the main group I was talking about are an age group that's of youths that are in their 20s and going into their 30s, you know. But in our local work, we do try to address this issue, that of child marriage, you know. We have some of our youths go out and advocate for them. They're in our program, in certain parts of our program, which are psychosocial work too, because we call a Peace Through Sports program, Peace Through Cinema program, and a literacy program on the ground that we do deal with young people. And during that time, we try to deal with some of these issues, which are massive in South Sudan, you know, and I'm sure in other places too, but I don't want to, again, I have great respect for South Sudan, so I don't want to, you know, it's just one of the problems is child marriage, early child marriage, and childbirth, death in childbirth, and education. We're working on it. We have a CRE program that we're implementing now, conflict resolution education program that we're putting inside of our program. So we are going to be going into schools just with that program. We did it in the U.S. because I also work in the U.S. with a different part of the program. We did it in Uganda, and now we're going to be doing that CRE program inside of some of the schools that are still open in the South Sudan.
And then I think we had a question about sort of involving all of the stakeholders in the in a solution.
I agree. The thing is, you know, the president called for a national dialogue. And I think, obviously, in order to really have a dialogue, you have to bring all the players together. I don't want to single out one of them because actually, currently, when I was just in South Sudan, I was talking with the country team and stuff. And there are a number of factions that are forming now, very large and powerful ones. Some out of the Equatorias with SACA, different individuals that would have to be brought to the table because I think it's becoming a much more complicated terrain than just looking at two now. So I think we have to recognize that and see if we can get the players from all those places. It's the only way we're going to really have a discussion is to get them together just to talk.
I think we have time for one very, very brief question. There was a gentleman there who had his hand up earlier.
Mr. Whitaker, thank you very much. My name is Patrick Youssef. I'm with the International Committee of the Red Cross, in charge of our operations in the Sahel region, also covering South Sudan. Thank you very much for the presentation and all the work that you've been doing. You mentioned something very exclusive that we don't hear much about. Famine is it's a man-made disaster in a way. And as it's man-made, and in order to avoid meeting here next year or the years after and repeating more or less the same, just showcasing the same agony of the South Sudanese, is there any diplomatic track that you believe could work in order to alleviate the suffering of people by states, but also supported by NGOs, the UN agencies, etc., where states could be involved in trying to stop that misery, not only in providing humanitarian assistance, because that's not the solution, but exactly in order to stop that conflict. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I mean, as I was saying, interesting. This is a man-made famine based on conflict. Certainly, the argument will be made that some of the natural, tragedies that have occurred, the monsoons, the droughts, the things of that nature are also man-made. It's an environmental issue. I think, that's something that has to be addressed. And it seems like at least the nations are stepping up to discuss that. I think when they signed the Paris Agreement, that brought 197 nations together to agree on environmental issues that needed to be addressed. I don't know all the points as to implementation, but I know that was very important, at least to get the nations to agree, and particularly some of the larger nations who are the larger pollutants like United States and China, But I'm hopeful that we can continue to convene, because I guess it's a discussion. And I look at this, because I try to look at it as a manageable solution too, because I was chosen as an advocate for the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. One of those goals is about the environment, and I'm always arguing that we need to bring this down to the human level, because I'm a grassroots kind of guy, I think, and try to put together a set of things and behaviors that people can actually accomplish that will help change some of the environmental issues that are going on in the planet. But I don't have, it's not my area of expertise. I'm just answering your question with my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you.